So tonight's session, this hour-long session, is going to be looking at activity-based planning, and this is one of the modules within our introduction to project management training. So we've got our standard housekeeping rules. We like people to try and arrive early for sessions, just in case they do have any technology problems. If you can stay on mute when you're not asking questions. And can we also ask as well, if you are able to keep questions till the end, that would suit us better. But if you're not understanding something, you can interrupt and say so immediately, because we can explain and help you with your understanding. Would ask you to take the training seriously. The session is being recorded and will be available on YouTube. We'll post a link to it on the Telegram instant messenger service that we use. If there are any assignments, we'll normally set a deadline for those assignments. If you do need to leave the call, if you can put a message into the chat facility and we'll see that. If you are able to buddy up with somebody, so to find somebody to work with to support you with your training, that will help. And if you can dedicate an hour a day to your learning, you will learn much more quickly just with that dedication. So that's our housekeeping rules. My name is Tony Langdon, and the purpose of this session is to understand really the classical method for planning a project. So we're going to review what's involved in activity-based planning. We'll take a look at where activity-based planning sits within the project life cycle. We'll practice a short exercise in activity-based planning, and then there will be an assignment to allow you to practice what you've learned. And the payoff is that you'll have gained the basic knowledge and ability to plan project activities. So we're going to look tonight at activity-based planning. And what we need to explain is that activity-based planning is a planning process that tries to do three things. It tries to identify all the tasks that must be completed. It tries to identify the resource necessary to complete each task, and it tries to schedule the task so that it starts when it needs to start, so that the project can finish on time. And activity-based planning is a classical approach to project management. The Egyptians who built the pyramids used activity-based planning. The Romans who built the roads and viaducts across Europe in late antiquity used activity-based planning. The infrastructures who built the great infrastructure projects in the 18th and 19th centuries, the canals, railways and bridges, they all used activity-based planning. But what they won't have done is use some of the refinements that were developed as a result of scientific methods that came about when project management started to be studied as a science in the 20th century. So we'll explain how activity-based planning works in a process in a moment, but I just wanted to mention that for small, simple projects, the list of tasks that needs to be completed might be quite short. For a larger or complex project, the task list is going to be very long. And as the complexity increases, it becomes more likely that critical tasks are not identified during planning. So there's a risk there that we miss something out. And clearly what we're trying to do as part of learning how to project manage correctly, we're trying to make sure that none of those critical tasks are missed out. And the list of tasks that need doing is typically organised so that the activities are arranged into the order that they need to be completed in. So first activities will be at the top of the list, the last activities at the bottom. And the list may be divided up into the stages of a project. We have a module on the project life cycle, and in that module we look at the different stages of a project, and we'll look later on in this module at where activity-based planning fits into that project life cycle. So we need to learn a bit more about what activity-based planning is. So what we're trying to do with activity-based planning is to break down the work. We're trying to identify everything that needs doing and break it down into smaller and smaller tasks so that we can be sure that we've got all of the tasks we need. This idea of decomposing tasks is a proven technique to ensure that all the tasks that need to be discovered are discovered during the planning of the project. Because the major projects that need doing are quite easy to discover. So for example, for a project to build a new bridge over a river, there may be just 3 major tasks. We need to design the bridge, we need to build it, and then finally, once the bridge is built, we might want to hold an opening ceremony. And we might identify that there are 3 different tasks, major tasks, to delivering this bridge, because the nature of these tasks is different. Designing a bridge is a different process to building a bridge, and building a bridge is a different process to having an opening ceremony. So for this particular project, we've identified that there are 3 major tasks because each of those tasks is quite different and distinct from each other. Now, having identified these 3 major tasks for building the bridge over the river, we can then move on to decomposing these tasks. So we would decompose designing the bridge into perhaps designing the foundations, designing the superstructure, designing the road that goes over the bridge, or the railway line that goes over the bridge. So we would decompose designing the bridge, and we would then decompose building the bridge. So we would decompose building the bridge into building foundations, building the superstructure, building the roadway or the rail infrastructure that sits on top of the bridge. And we could break down the task of holding the opening ceremony, because we are likely to want a dignitary to come along. So we need to identify who we're going to invite, who's available. We might need to have a backup dignitary in place in case something happens with the first dignitary. We need to schedule a date for the opening ceremony. All these things are tasks that need doing. So we have to think, when we are planning the project, what are the major tasks that need doing? What can we identify as being the major parts of the project? And then we decompose those tasks. And as I mentioned, the engineers who built the great infrastructure projects, like the railways, would have taken exactly this approach. They would have broken the task down into surveying the route, then analysing all the materials that they needed, and then starting to build the tunnels and the embankments that they need, and then laying what they call the permanent way, which is the railway lines that go on top. So they would have followed exactly this process of identifying the major tasks and then breaking that down so that they would have a task to build the first bridge, the second bridge, the third bridge they need, the embankments, and only when the entire route is available would they then perhaps just start to build the track. You might think that they might start to build the track before the entire route was complete, and indeed they may decide to do that. That is one way in which the engineers in the 19th century would have optimized their project plan, and that would be by starting some of the tasks while other tasks were still underway. So this idea of decomposing the tasks down into smaller and smaller tasks, that carries on until there are no more lower level tasks that can be discovered, or more likely that the tasks start to become trivial. You don't want to overplan the project. You don't want to talk about installing in every individual nut and bolt on the bridge. You want to talk about the main items of work and the smaller items of work where those items of work are still useful and still need to be documented. It may be the case that you might have an expert who could be assigned to undertake a task, and because they're an expert, they don't need to be told the detail of all the subtasks that sit under that task. They're expert enough to know how to, for example, install electrical wiring. So you don't need to give them the detail on that. They know what's necessary. So if you have experts involved in the project, then it may be possible to stop decomposing tasks at an earlier point than if you have less expert resources working on the project. So that's the idea of breaking the work down into smaller and smaller bits until the tasks start to become trivial. Once the tasks become trivial, there's no point breaking them down further. And in fact, you may have gone too far in breaking them down if they start to become trivial. So I've got a slide that just shows you this idea of how our bridge example might be decomposed. So designing the bridge might require a site survey and then design work to design a bridge that would suit the site conditions. Building the bridge might require recruitment of workers, ordering of materials, building the foundations, building the superstructure, and building the roadway. And holding the opening ceremony might require the tasks of identifying a dignitary to open the bridge, scheduling an opening date and press releases, sending out invites, holding the ceremony. So this is what we would do, is we would identify the major tasks first and then decompose those tasks, break them down into the smaller and smaller tasks until they start to become trivial. Now, this decomposed list of tasks is called a work breakdown structure, and that's often abbreviated to WBS. Now, we can capture the work breakdown structure in a number of different ways. You could capture it as a structured list, as shown on the left-hand side at the top of this page. So we're showing that you've got designing the bridge, and then underneath that you've got surveying the site, designing the bridge to suit the site conditions, designing the roadway. Having designed the roadway, you then know what load that roadway is going to put on the bridge structure. So you can design the bridge structure to determine what load will be on the foundations. Then you can design the foundations. So you could do the work breakdown structure as a structured list, as we have in the top left. But you can also do it as a diagram. In the bottom left of the page, we've got a diagram that shows we've got the new bridge, and that is broken down into designing the bridge, building the bridge, holding the opening ceremony. And then similarly, designing the bridge is broken down into the site survey, designing the bridge, and then designing the bridge to suit the site conditions is broken down into designing the road, designing the bridge, designing the foundations. And of course, we can capture that structured list into a project management tool. And this is very commonly used in business. So we'll have a software tool whereby we can capture our work breakdown structure into a tool that's specifically designed to help us manage the project. And that's what we're showing in the bottom right-hand corner of this screen. We've got a piece of software where we can put our work breakdown structure in, along with other information, such as when we think the task can start, when we think it will end, and so on. So when we import the work breakdown structure into our software tool, we're able to add extra information to it that turns it from being just a work breakdown structure into being more of a fully fledged project plan with dates and resources and other information on the plan that you would need. So, are there any questions on that concept of identifying the tasks that are needed and breaking those tasks down into the subtasks to give us a list of tasks which would be called the work breakdown structure? Okay. So the next thing we need to think about is dependencies between tasks, because when a task can start is often determined by the interdependencies between tasks. So for example, you can't start writing some software to meet some business requirements unless you have some business requirements. So the first task would be to gather some business requirements. The second task would be to write some software to meet those requirements. The second task is dependent on that first task. And in a similar way, you can't start building the structure of a bridge until there are foundations to build upon. So there are dependencies between tasks, and this is very common in projects where something has to happen first before the next thing can happen. And we need to think about how we represent these interdependencies. And the way that we do it is that the tasks are often identified by assigning each task a unique number, which would be called a task ID. So writing the software would be task ID 2, gathering the business requirements would be task ID 1. And what we would do is we would note against the task all of the task IDs which have to be completed before that task could be started. So in our software example, if task ID 2 is writing the software and that can't start until we have business requirements, we would say that task ID 2 is dependent on task ID 1. And you'd use that same sort of idea with the bridge example. The task IDs are assigned just in order that you discover the tasks. You can then note against each task which other task IDs that task is dependent upon, what has to be done before the next task can start. Okay, so dependencies are an important concept for us, and they're particularly important because they affect how quickly the project can be completed, because in some cases we can start tasks before other tasks are complete, but in some cases we can't. And we need to understand those interdependencies between the tasks before we can finish planning the project. So it's really important that we identify what dependencies we have between tasks. So any questions on dependencies? Okay. So the next thing I wanted to mention was the idea about a milestone. So a milestone is a point on a project plan where a significant delivery has happened. And that delivery could be the end of a stage. It could be the completion of an important internal deliverable for the project. So for example, if we're gathering a set of business requirements, when those requirements are approved, that's actually quite a major step for us, because we now have a set of requirements that are approved, they're fixed. We can start to design some software that would meet those requirements. But the delivery could also be something that would be of major use to the business, like a new system or the construction of a bridge. So a milestone is just a point on a plan where a significant delivery has happened. And the milestone is reached when all of the tasks necessary to complete the delivery have been completed. So if the delivery is a bridge, then we have to have built the foundations, we have to have built the superstructure, we have to have built the roadway. All of those tasks need to be complete before the milestone of completing the bridge is complete. And when we use project management software, it's often the case that milestones are entered and treated as tasks, but they have a zero duration. They take no time to complete. And this means that we can add interdependencies to say this milestone is dependent on all these other tasks being complete. But once all of those tasks have been complete, because the milestone itself has a zero duration, it takes no time. Once all the predecessor tasks are complete, then the milestone is reached instantly. It takes no time to cross over that milestone point. It's a point in time, so it has a zero duration rather than the tasks. The task will normally take at least a day to complete, and in some cases much longer than that. So milestones are an important concept for us. One of the reasons that they're important is that it's very useful for communicating out from the project to the project stakeholders to say that certain important deliveries have been made, because people will be interested in whether the project is on track, whether it's making progress, and whether it's delivering the things that the business needs. So having milestones on your plan gives you an idea as to when you should be communicating out that major deliveries have occurred from the project. Okay, so that's the concept of milestones. I want to talk now about risks and activity-based planning. Hi there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, please, I need to ask a question about sprint. You mentioned milestone.
Yes.
I know what sprint is, but it's like they're a bit similar. Am I right or wrong?
Yes. So PRINCE is a project management methodology, and it includes a lot more than activity-based planning. And actually, PRINCE 2 actually prefers to use a slightly different method of planning that is called product-based planning. Now, we do have a module on product-based planning, but what we do is we teach activity-based planning first, because it is this classical way of planning projects. It's the most basic method that you can use for planning projects. Product-based planning, which is recommended by PRINCE 2, builds on activity-based planning, and you need to understand activity-based planning before you can think about product-based planning. So activity-based planning it can be used as part of PRINCE 2, but PRINCE 2 would normally recommend using product-based planning, which is a later development that came after activity-based planning.
Okay, all right, thanks. Yeah.
Hi, Tony.
Hi.
Yeah, just to clarify, so can we conclude that a milestone is when the project has been completed, right?
Sure.
So okay. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Does it when it's completed? Does it not include when it's being signed off by the client that the project has been completed? Is that it?
It can be, yes. So usually at the end of the project, when everything is done, there will be a milestone there to say that every deliverable has been delivered, has been signed off by the client, everyone's happy. That would be a milestone.
Milestone.
But
Okay.
yeah, that would be a milestone, but the project can have other milestones before that.
Okay.
So any time a significant delivery has happened, and that delivery could just be the end of the stage.
Okay.
So when we talk about the project life cycle, we understand that there are basically 4 significant stages within a project. Project initiation, which is where the project starts.
Yeah.
Project planning, where all the planning work happens. Delivery, where all the things that are needed are actually built and tested and implemented. And then the final stage is the close down stage, which is a very short stage that really just aims to confirm what was done, what wasn't done, what was learned, and that everything has been tidied up at the end of the project. So through that life cycle, the completion of a stage could be a milestone.
Right.
Yeah. So you can have milestones at any point within the project, but usually at the end of the project, when all the deliverables have been delivered, so at the end of the delivery stage, that would always be a milestone.
Okay. All right.
Because there will always be great interest within the business that all the project deliveries are complete.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the milestone. And it was a good question, I thought, about the Prince 2, because Prince 2 is actually quite a large methodology, and it does talk about more than just planning. We do also talk on this training course about Agile. I don't know if you've heard of Agile particularly, but Agile is another project management methodology, and Agile does work well with activity-based planning and with product-based planning. But Agile is its own thing, and it works in a particular way, and you need to understand how Agile works to then see how it would work with activity-based planning, how it would work with product-based planning, and how you can use these different techniques to get the best result for your projects. One of the things we're trying to do is to give you enough information so that you understand about activity-based planning, about product-based planning, and about Agile, so that you can see when you need to be using each one. You understand what are the advantages of each and what are the disadvantages of them, so that you can use the right technique at the right time in your project. Okay. So we'll go on to talk about risk. Now, one of the activities we undertake in the initiation stage of the project, when it's just starting, is we start to think about what risks the project's facing. And we continue to think about those risks through the planning stage and through delivery until the risks can no longer hurt the project. And as part of our risk management, we need to think about whether risks can be mitigated. And if I just hold my mouse over the word mitigated, it tells us that mitigated means to make something less serious. So we're trying to make a risk less serious to the project. And there are various different ways in which we do that. And we've got a module on risk that looks at that. But in terms of our planning, we need to appreciate that mitigating a risk could require us to have to add a new task to our work breakdown structure, or it could need us to change some detail about an existing task, and that might make the task take longer, or it might mean that we need more resource to complete the task. And finally, we could mitigate the risk by owning it outside of the project, so that it isn't a new task and it's not a change to an existing task. It just isn't on the project plan at all. It's handed to somebody who's outside of the project and they deal with that risk. and that's that risk transference to outside of the project is another approach that we could take. But if we're going to do something about a risk and we're using activity-based planning, really the only options are that we either need a new task in our work breakdown structure, or we have to change something about an existing task that might make it take longer or need more resource. So when we're planning, and particularly using activity-based planning, we need to think about all the risks we have and check in our risk log to see that we've got all the tasks that we need, and we've amended any tasks that are necessary so that our risk mitigation plans are embedded into our project plan. Because you don't want to be running two different plans, one for mitigating your risks, one for delivering the project. You really want everything that the project needs to do to be in one place, and that one place should be in the project plan. So we need to think about what new tasks need to be added, or whether any tasks need to be changed in order to manage our risk properly. And once we're confident that we've got a list of tasks that is complete, we can then move on to identifying what resources are necessary to complete each task. And we can then schedule the tasks. But we need to think about the fact that resources are finite. If we had an infinite amount of resource, i.e. an infinite number of people, an infinite number of machines, then it might be possible to start every task on the first day of the project and finish every task on the first day of the project. But that's an ideal situation that never happens. So we have to schedule the tasks to take into account resource availability. And we have to understand that a task may be ready to start because all of the predecessors, all of the dependent tasks have been completed, but there's no resource available. So we have to wait for resource to be available. So scheduling is one of the major activities with activity-based planning. But to schedule, we need to identify the resource that is needed to undertake each task, and we need to estimate how long that resource is going to take to complete that task. So again, if we go to our bridge building exercise, if we're considering the task of designing the bridge, we need to think about how long it's going to take to design the bridge and how many designers are going to be needed. So you might decide that it's going to take 7 weeks if you have 3 designers, but perhaps if you can get 4 designers, you might be able to reduce it to 6 weeks. So once you have a list of tasks that's complete, you would review each task in turn to see how long you think it's going to take to complete the task and what resource you need to do that task. And as an experienced project manager, I would say it's a very good idea to involve the people who are going to be doing the task in the estimating of the task. Those people that are going to be doing the work will have the best insight as to how long the work is likely to take them. So I would always say, if you can, involve the people that are going to do the work in estimating how long that work is going to take. Okay. So we need to think then about how we schedule. And I mentioned earlier that there's been some scientific study of project management as a discipline. And in around 1910, a chap called Henry Gantt invented a bar chart. And these Gantt charts, as they were called, they basically show our list of tasks that need to be performed to deliver the project on the vertical axis of the chart, and they show time as the horizontal width of bars on the graph, for each activity. So for example, if we look at what we have on the little diagram or image on this page, we can see that designing the solution is the first task, and we've got that task taking a number of weeks. Each of those columns on the diagram can represent days, weeks, or months, whatever you need them to. But that shows that designing the solution is going to take 3 units. Within the section that's called Product MVP, we've got 3 tasks, 3 subtasks that need doing: design, UX, and engineering. The design and UX can happen at the same time, so presumably they're being done by different people. But the design is going to take 2 units, the UX is going to take 2 units, and then the engineering work that's needed after that is going to take 3 units. So this was Henry Gantt's invention, the idea of a Gantt chart to show our task list coming down the page and the duration of tasks going across the page in standard units. And these modern Gantt charts, they can also be used to show the interdependencies between tasks, and that's very often done with an arrow. So for example, the design and UX tasks, if they're dependent on the design of the solution, a modern project management tool would have an arrow showing that the design is dependent on design solution and UX is dependent on design solution. So these Gantt charts can carry quite a lot of information in them, and they're very useful for scheduling and for visualizing dependencies and visualizing the flow of the project through all the tasks that need to be complete. So are you happy with the idea of what a Gantt chart is and what it shows?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Just so you're aware, we've got this project meeting with Yatundi at 8 o'clock. So I'm going to try and finish this session a little earlier than that. So we'll carry on for another couple of minutes. I'll just do one more slide, but unfortunately we're not going to get through everything on this session tonight. So I'll have to continue next week on this, but we'll do another slide. And we'll talk about something called the critical path method, or CPM. So if we've got a long list of tasks that need doing because the project is complicated, and if there are complicated dependencies between the tasks, and if resources are finite and shared, it can be difficult to see how long the project will take to deliver, even if the duration of tasks can be reasonably well estimated. And in 1956, these 2 organisations, DuPont and Remington Rand Univac, now called Unisys, they developed something called the critical path method that could be used to determine how long any given set of dependent tasks would take. And it's quite an important piece of knowledge for us to understand how the critical path method works, because it underpins all modern project management software. All modern project management software uses the critical path method, CPM, to schedule the project. And so we need to understand how it does that so that we can appreciate the information that the scheduling needs. And we have this separate module on CPM. So we will take a look at that in the fullness of time. But I think it's 5 to 8 now. I think what we'll do is we'll end the session there. And if you want to take a break and come back and join us for the other, for the project management meeting, just be aware that the link for the project management meeting is different. you'll need to click on the link that was provided on the KP Summer Cohort group on Telegram for the project management meeting. Okay, so I'll stop the recording there. As I say, the recording will be available on YouTube tomorrow, and I'll put a link to it on Telegram.
All right, thank you, Tony.